Yeah, I
Yeah.
think mostly, well, Shahruz knows Kristen and I since we've hung
Yep.
out, and then so I guess the three of you guys can hash it out. However, introductions work these days. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, pick a
I think
persona and then talk about it.
I think
Yep.
Shahruz knows too that we met you guys through the internet and we've been talking about stuff, so he knows somewhat of like how we're related, which
Yeah.
is helpful. Yeah.
Cool. CJ, wanna kick it off?
Sure. Well, yeah, I guess John said my name, so I'm CJ. I guess it's also here in Zoom. So, yeah, sure. It's nice to meet you. I think maybe I've gotten a little bit of context too, because I guess your guys' call previously was all recorded. So I watched that and kind of was able to see
Cool.
some of the stuff that you'd been doing with like the bank as well as 32 Swords,
Cool.
which is really interesting, both of those things. But I guess I was formerly a developer at Qualcomm, and I left about like 6 or 8 months ago now, and kind of just working on side projects. And now like these conversations seem to have been like spinning up with Kristen, Dave, John, and myself, and kind of just like interested in a lot of these kind of spaces, like tools for thought, as well as like blockchains and I don't know, relationships and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think I feel like it's still quite gooey to explain, but I don't know, just like excited, and I think like I can see the things you're thinking about, like, oh, these things are really awesome. So anyway.
Cool. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Yep.
Yeah, very nice to meet you as well.
John here. CJ and I went to high school together, and I think it makes sense why we like sat in the library reading like Wikipedia articles and like just like I think back to sixth grade to like actually everything makes sense now. But yeah, I've also been in software for a couple of years now, just doing startups, but continuously getting sort of pulled into two directions at once. One is like the typical like Silicon Valley, a couple people join and build a thing together, and then this much more interesting world where everybody builds together and shares, and it's much closer to, I think, the ideals of the internet than anything I've seen so far. And yeah, continuously obsessing over tools for thought, note taking, whatever that I define that as these days, which I think all of us have like kind of some parallel interests there. And yeah, I got a little bit of context on your work from a snippet CJ shared with me from that talk, because I've just been a chaotic couple of weeks here, but looked amazing, and I'm very excited to hear more and see how you built that out.
Dave mentioned you were nomadic as well. Where are you at these days?
Currently Mexico City,
Nice.
and then probably in about 2 weeks over to Ensenada, Kristen, Dave, and that's gonna be awesome. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I guess I can go real quick over kind of my background too. I am also a software developer, but primarily working in entertainment companies. So I got my start working at Earwolf, which is a comedy podcast network. Spent a couple of years there, and then went on to BuzzFeed right as BuzzFeed Video was starting up. Worked there for a few years, and then was a co-founder at Super Deluxe, which was a Time Warner owned like Adult Swim for the internet kind of thing. Which shut down a few years ago, and since then I've just been kind of experimenting, just kind of building stuff, and then recently started on blockchain stuff a few months ago. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
Shahruz, how did you find blockchain? I don't know if we talked about like how did you end up that way? Is it similar to like John was saying, where he feels like he's like pulled between two worlds, like one more centralized and one that seems, yeah.
I think that by when I was coming across it like over the past few years, I was probably a little dismissive and just like I didn't totally get it, and I was falling for a lot of like the negative aspects of like the speculative cryptocurrency side of things, but not so much like here's what blockchain can be outside of that. And then when the NFT stuff started up a few months ago, and I saw artists that like I was, at Super Deluxe and BuzzFeed trying to figure out ways to like how to, monetize and distribute these things more efficiently. That kind of piqued my interest of like, oh, maybe there's actually a model here. And then just digging into the technical specs of ERC 721, which is the NFT kind of standard, seeing that there's a lot of really cool parallels with like what RSS used to be in terms of like standardizing media and distribution around those things, except now you've got monetization built in, you've got social built in, and you can program hooks so that things happen when a transfer is initiated or a sale is initiated. It just seemed like RSS, but modernized, and that kind of piqued my interest. I've been messing around with it ever since.
Yeah. It does feel like an all-in-wonder kind of thing.
Can you actually talk a little bit more like the parallel you see with RSS? I think RSS, maybe like coming back to what John said about like us in high school, is I remember looking at the same 4 websites every day, like a non-tech PC perspective. I was like very into computer hardware, and eventually I figured out, oh, these places all have RSS feeds, and then I've been like consuming RSS ever since. So like to me, like RSS is like very near and dear to me, and like Google Reader getting killed is like a huge thing, right? And so I'm like very curious, like what ways you see like NFTs and ERC 721 being like parallel to RSS.
I guess my background being more in podcasting, so I worked at your role for a while, and then I have a podcast client too that kind of funds some stuff on the side. So I've been digging deeper into the podcast side of things, and the fact that it's one of the only kind of I think it might be the only medium right now that's viable where people who are on the creator side can use whatever products, whatever services they want to post and distribute those things, and the consumers can use whatever apps they want to consume those things. That's made entirely possible because there's an open shared standard for how those things are distributed that anybody can conform to on either side. So what I see with the ERC 721 is the exact same thing, but not just what was included in the RSS standard 20 years ago. But now, if you look at like Facebook's got their own kind of post schema, and Tumblr's got its own post schema, Instagram, et cetera, Twitter. The idea that you can now do a standardized post schema, and the ERC 721 doesn't necessarily have the feed concept quite yet, but that can be built on top of it. To me, it's just the fact that you can standardize metadata around all these things, and any app can be there to consume it. So it's kind of magical right now that if you own a bunch of NFTs, you can launch a different app that just came out yesterday, and all your content will be right there. To me, that's very parallel with, or very similar to the way RSS works with podcasts. And that if I wanted to switch from Apple Podcasts to Overcast, it's pretty trivial to do so, and all the content will be there exactly the same way. So that kind of freedom of distribution, lack of kind of monopolistic ability on the creation side and transferability, and the idea that these things can be independent but still interconnected and part of a larger ecosystem, I think is what interests me there.
Okay. So like
I guess any of what I just
no, I think at least to me it makes sense. The only thing that like remains kind of question is, when you say standardized metadata, you mean like once the NFT is minted or like whatever, it has like some metadata associated with it, but is that metadata always the same across NFTs, or is it like some person kind of defining what that metadata is, or is it the fact that the metadata exists mean it can kind of be reusable in these different formats, just like inherently?
I think it's all of those things. Basically, the right now what it is that every NFT needs to be able to link to a JSON file that's hosted somewhere, and that JSON file should have some standard things like here's the title, here's the description, and the kind of keys for those are just title and description. So any app that wants to view those NFTs can just consume title, description, image, URL, etc. But as things develop, there's nothing stopping more metadata from being put into those JSON files. So it's kind of just like who wants to adopt which standards that are on top of this this core standard that each NFT has a JSON file linked to it.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And are these JSON files like extendable through the NFT over time, or is it like fixed once you've kind of created it?
The doesn't prevent anything from being immutable. So you can host the JSON file on a traditional server. You can put it, you can have it be an API response. You can have it be an S3 hosted file. It can be updated over time.
I see.
So for example, with 32 swords, where each NFT corresponds with a chess piece, one of the things that I have to accommodate for is a pawn reaching the opposite side can be promoted into a queen or a knight or a bishop or whatever that pawn wants to be promoted into. So at that point, I need to be able to update that metadata. So in my instance, I'm using an API response to serve that JSON that represents that metadata.
I see.
Is there any sort of versioning on this metadata? Or does that just depend on how the person implements it? So optional.
It's implementation specific. Yeah, there's no standard that I've seen quite yet. There might be one that's been proposed, but not one that I've seen widely adopted personally.
Gotcha.
Interesting. I guess one of the things I was thinking about yesterday in relation to NFTs, and I think I'm getting a sense of the answer just through what you've said already, Shahruz. But the NFTs themselves are existing on top of a blockchain, but it's not like they have a blockchain that they're like really, it's not like they are a blockchain as well, right? It's not like if you did change the metadata, like it wouldn't be getting versioned that way through a blockchain or something like that. It's purely this, like, it's just looking at a JSON file and saying like, oh, look at that thing over there. And that's like what we'll pull the information from.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the blockchain is that storage is relatively expensive compared to execution. So you don't want to be putting like, all that metadata onto the blockchain itself, because that just increases gas costs and all that.
Got it.
So yeah.
Okay. But something like pointing to different files, say like different files on IPFS, maybe is more reasonable, but as long as the chain wouldn't grow like out of hand in size or something.
Yeah. And I'm personally been working on the Polygon blockchain, which is a layer 2, which is like a lot more efficient, proof of stake. Fees are like exponentially lower, so it costs like a fraction of a cent to mint something. So on that, I can be a little bit more liberal with like what I actually store on the blockchain. But on Ethereum itself, I think you're talking about like, hundreds of extra dollars per minting to be able to actually store that metadata there.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So I kind of have like a few other questions like written down.
Please,
if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Great, because like I was thinking about the other video, some things thinking about this week, and I was like, oh man, I do have questions like just in the space, and I remember from the other conversation too. I might, Shahruz, if you could forward me some more of these technical documents. I don't know if it was only the ERC 721 like document itself, or other documents that like really helped you understand the more like technical side of things. I would love to kind of learn more. I did go through your code on gimmicks to kind of just see like how it was all glued together, and like I can see generally like how things are happening, but I think there's a little bit of like magic in there that is just like some missing understanding from some of these more like technical documents. So I guess since you mentioned Polygon, I kind of knew that you were using it as well, but why did you choose Polygon? Is it just like something that's like easy to use, and like that was kind of the thing that like made you use it? Or
initial reason to not go with Ethereum yet was the ecological costs, which correlate 1-to-1 with the actual like dollar cost too of minting and each transaction and all that, because it uses like 99 times or 1,000 times as much energy, so it's going to cost 1,000 times as much. So I wanted to avoid the ecological costs and the kind of pushback that people rightfully have against that kind of thing, while still being able to experiment. So the benefit of Polygon is that it uses the exact same virtual machine as Ethereum. So it's 100% the same code, 100% the same ecosystem, the same developer resources and stuff that are applicable. It's just the difference of where I'm deploying it to. So what's nice about it is that if and when Ethereum does become more efficient, once it switches to proof of stake, I can just take any code that I've already worked on and just deploy it onto Ethereum's mainnet without having to modify anything. So it felt like the best of both worlds, where I could, experiment, learn the same stuff that will be useful down the line, without having to deal with those costs in the meantime.
So do you expect that, like, once Ethereum moves to proof of stake, that like Polygon will be obsoleted, or is it something that'll kind of just continue to improve like the cost and like efficiency of the system overall, like it as an L2?
Yeah, I can't say for sure. I have no idea. Because
Okay.
I think a lot of it comes down to, like, how much does the Ethereum usage increase at that time? Because gas is the way that gas is priced out is like a bidding system. So everybody that wants their transactions to happen is basically bidding against each other to have their transactions be a higher priority. Whereas Polygon, everything is kind of a fixed cost. There's no bidding system.
I see.
So I think it's 50-50, I guess. I don't know what to expect at that point. I don't think Polygon's going to go away, though, because I think already they're handling about 5 million transactions a day, and I think Ethereum is about at 1 million. So,
Wow.
like, if like Visa said that they're going to start settling all their transactions on a blockchain too. So if those things come in that are extremely high frequency and have like extremely high kind of transaction requirements per day, I think Polygon and those kinds of things will still be kind of useful in making sure that those are cost efficient.
Okay. Interesting.
But at the same time, it could all disappear overnight too. It might be made
Obsolete.
useless by comparison. Yeah.
Huh. I guess, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around even what the L2s are really doing. Like, is it eventually still settling things on the blockchain, but kind of like, I have some idea of like how Lightning Network is working, but how are these other like methods of building an L2 on, like, working instead?
Yeah, I believe that Polygon, I don't know the frequency of it, but at a certain kind of rate, they're compiling and compressing all the transactions that happened within that last period, and then backing that up onto the Ethereum mainnet for security purposes. I don't totally understand it myself either, but that's my understanding of it.
The general concept.
Yeah. But because Polygon has its own kind of network of people running the validators and the actual machines that are processing that code, it's a separate set of nodes that are processing things on that blockchain.
Hence, they get to avoid the high gas fees.
Yeah, that and it's proof of stake as opposed to proof of work. So with proof of work, you have the kind of needless computation that are driving the prices up because they need that for security purposes. Polygon is already proof of stake. So in that case, people are putting in a certain amount of Polygon's tokens and staking it, meaning if ever a node does something malicious, if it tries to mess with certain values, then that amount that has been staked will be forfeited. So it's essentially, instead of doing the pointless computations, it's like, don't mess with the network, otherwise you'll lose your money that you put up for it.
Sort of like some sort of escrow guarantee, as opposed to
basically
pure mathematical guarantee. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
For the sake of security, to make sure that no one node is writing malicious data to it.
Yeah, Vitalik has a lot of videos and writings and all this stuff on how they're breaking out like the layers and what you get performance gain wise and all this other stuff. Most of it's over my head, but there's a fair amount of like description out there.
Yeah, it seems like pretty wild to me. I think I understand proof of work. It makes sense. Proof of stake, I'm like, oh, this is like a social game being played, and you're like essentially like betting on people not to like go against themselves, which is like pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is down to all the game theory stuff, which is another overlap with what Shahruz is doing. So like, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
I don't think I had anything. Yeah, I don't think I had like anything in particular, Dave.
Okay. I mean, that kind of segues over into a little bit of like the style of playing with all of this, and like potentially how to get into some projects like that are a little bit more tangible. Um, yeah, and I don't know where to start with this. I still don't have any of it organized mentally or otherwise. But basically, I think the sort of working idea from, we had a conversation on Monday between the four of us, and then Shahruz and Kristen and I had a conversation a little while ago that sort of solidified the sort of game concept, and how you design generally these like systems of play to incent people to come in and build the thing, kind of. So like the the like sort of loose idea in the nearer term is the idea of having like sort of a sort of game that builds itself around this relational OS idea. And maybe there's some stuff in here where like we can talk about like the sort of graph relationship to blockchain, and maybe you guys can poke around that, and there's some better understanding there. But the general idea being that we present like a sort of design fiction, that there is a new type of operating system like that is based on relationality, and there is a bunch of sort of benefits in that, and we need people to build this thing, and then there is some sort of token system economy that could underlie the development of this, and the loosest thinking on it is that we do it in a sort of event style, with seasonality, right? So that like each season can sort of build on the last. And early days, it's to collect players that like are interested in the world, and then sort of defining who those early players should be around what sort of types of projects, but the projects being games themselves. So like designing sort of like I guess sort of role-based like challenges or whatever they are, that are sort of collaborative in nature. And like probably the best place to look to for this is Mirror right now. Like they seem to be doing the thing that makes the most sense. But something that's along these lines, and I don't know, that's sort of I don't know, I'm probably missing a bunch of pieces because I'm full of COVID RNA rewriting.
Well,
Anyways,
sorry,
if you guys have anything to fill in.
What was Mirror?
It's Mirror XYZ. I don't know if Shahruz,
Writing.
you have a
Yeah.
better
It's a
description of
writing
it.
platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw this. This was
pitching themselves as a writing platform.
Yep.
But they're also doing a lot in terms of like just building tools for like fundraising and building tools for like setting up DAOs essentially. So
Yeah.
I think their scope is kind of a lot more than writing at this point in a pretty cool way.
Yeah,
They
I
have
think
seasons too. They have like what do they call them? Prompts that they put out, and like people respond to the prompts.
yeah, and they've got a sort of voting mechanism to like they're moving towards, like they're moving away from a gatekeeping model to having the sort of hive mind, like accept whoever they want as the new writing talent into the thing. I'm very curious to see how well that works, if it just becomes another popularity contest or not. But that's the fun of this thing. Like,
is it
and
tokenized?
then yeah. It's
So is there like
right.
money at stake, or some token at stake, like for winning one of the rounds or whatever it may be?
One of the mechanics that I understand is like, so they offer right tokens. That's their token, and like one of the things you do to like join the network is to burn your token. I think that like I forget how the exact mechanics are, but and then so there's a sacrifice model there, and then I don't know how, maybe Shahruz, you have a better understanding, but how you can, by participation, you can collect more right tokens, and that gives you like a heavier weighted voting, like percentage or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
that's my understanding too. I think that they might have two different token types potentially. One which is essentially like an invite model where they have this thing every week called the right race, which essentially is a popularity contest. You have people applying to join the network, and then you have others voting for who should be allowed to join the network, and then they take the top 10 winners each week, and I believe they reward them with one invite token. So to create your blog or whatever they're calling it on Mirror, you have to have that token and you have to burn it as to basically redeem your invite. But because it's on the blockchain and because it's a token, it can be transferred, it can be sold, it can, be used how you want. I don't totally understand the way that the voting maps with tokens yet either.
Yeah.
And how participation is rewarded on Mirror.
Need to poke around that. Yeah, so actually, Shahruz, can you mention the what is it, Chowder Town? Is that what it's called?
Chowder City.
Croutons and stuff? Chowder
Sure,
City.
yeah.
Yeah, because I think
Chowder
the model
City,
there
yeah,
would be
so,
helpful.
Sure. So this is like before I started experimenting with blockchain project. So I have been working on I'm still figuring out what to call it, a dynamic podcast network essentially. So if you're familiar with how dynamic ads work on podcasts today, where they, instead of just serving a raw file off of file storage, they're analyzing a little bit about like, where's this request coming from? What do we know about this user? What is their location? What time of day is it, et cetera? And then they're routing to an appropriate file or potentially creating an audio file on the fly. So I'm taking that concept, but instead of using it just for advertising, we're trying to make more dynamic or interactive programming. So Chowder City is we have a writer who wrote a sci-fi epic where you yourself are the player. Right, I don't know I'm so bad at describing it still. The whole podcast is essentially second person, where at the end of each episode, you get a prompt in the episode description. So you get a couple buttons or that you get to decide how you want to play or what action you want to take at the end of that episode. You tap that button, and then it registers your response. And then the next day or whatever the next kind of cycle is, you get a specific episode delivered to you that may not be the same as somebody else's. So what I like about this, and kind of going back to the RSS thing, is that it uses the exact RSS standards, meaning it's available in Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Cast, whatever podcast app you want to use. So that's Chowder City, which is in production now. We're recording and mixing and editing all that now. But because I don't want to launch a podcast to 0 people, and I want to kind of ramp up and have an audience kind of waiting for it and excited about the world that's already been developed and kind of, ready to get into the podcast day one when it launches. We have this ARG going that's going to start about a month before the podcast drops, called Century Computer. So what I'm doing with Century Computer, let me actually see if I can share my screen for that. Give you guys a quick demo of where it's at.
I have to update it. Give me one sec. Should be good.
Cool. All right. So a lot of this is going to look kind of janky and performance-wise too. It's still a work in progress. So with Century Computer, I'm playing around with a lot of the crypto ideas, but I wanted to make it so that the audience didn't have to worry about all the UX challenges that exist today, like connecting a wallet or even knowing what all that is. So part of Century Computer, the first gate kind of step is submitting a snippet of any classified data created after midnight, January 1st, 2088, to confirm their clearance. Again, this is all like a game. It's intentionally kind of tense and difficult to understand. But what this is doing is, as you type stuff in, it is it's doing a hash of the text that's been inputted, and it's looking for a series of repeating C's behind the scenes. It's not apparent to the user. So if I type in something that I already know is valid, level 4, for example, is a valid secret, it updates and gives a status there. Let me try something that might not be in here. can also spam a bunch of numbers to try and find one quick. Sorry about that. I should have had one prepared.
It's fine. We get to see how it works.
Basically, as you're typing it in, it's automatically running that crypto function. And then once it finds a valid one, it will tell me what level clearance I have. So if it's 3 repeating C's in a row, that's level 1 clearance. If it's 4 repeating C's in a row, level 2 clearance, and so on. Each of those things kind of exponentially more difficult than the previous level. You usually find one this way. Oh, I remember one that I might not have put in. There we go. Nope, I already submitted that one. Sorry about that. We'll find one eventually here. This is intentionally meant to be difficult so that the audience has to kind of communicate with each other and figure out what's actually going on and what their strategy should be and what else they should try and how to divvy up kind of things that they should be trying out. And then once they actually start discovering them, they can start sharing them amongst each other to make it easy for others to join.
Are you providing a communication environment, or are you just leaving that up to them?
So that is step 2. Basically, once you have access to this, let me actually quickly just clear out the database for this so that I can type in one that I already know. Basically, once you unlock a secret, the next thing that you get is an invite to the Discord. And the
cool.
Discord is only able to, you can only access it through this mechanism. Users are not able to send invites amongst each other. And roles are automatically assigned, and roles correspond to channels. So if you have a level 4 clearance, you'll get access to a specific set of channels. If you have level 1 clearance, you'll get access to a specific set of channels. And so on. All right, so I've cleared out the database. Let me try writing box again. All right, so now I can submit. And once I submit, button should pop up here. Again, this is not fully designed, but I can hit begin now. I need to make this look more with better contrast. Can you guys see the zoomed in kind of view here?
Possibly.
What I'm doing here is I generated a wallet after a successful input. And this up here is the private key for that wallet. It's only stored on the front end, or not stored, it's only shown on the front end, never stored on the back end. So I'm asking people to store the secret somewhere safe, that we will not be able to recover it under no circumstances should you allow anyone else to see it. And you won't be asked to enter it into the Sentry computer again in the future. Some rules are meant to be broken. This is not one of them. So the expectation is that people will copy paste this in, confirm they understand, confirm they've stored it somewhere, and then I'm ready to join the Sentry Council, which I need to set up in the environment variables on the actual server. But this would then take you to the Discord authentication. So it would bounce you over to like a Discord OAuth screen that puts you into the and behind the scenes, the thing that I'm storing here is the public key, or the address essentially for that Ethereum wallet that was just generated. And let me see if I've got it stored here. No, I should have been a little bit more prepped for this. Sorry, but what's happening at this time is the secrets are minted as NFTs and rewarded to that wallet. So the user again has no idea yet. I'm hoping that this will be like a cool thing that happens at the end, where I tell them, hey, that private key that you wrote down earlier, put that into MetaMask, and you'll have a wallet with all your secrets that you discovered as NFTs, and they'll be available on OpenSea and anywhere that works with that ecosystem of NFTs. And then what we have is an ERC20 called croutons, which are kind of in universe. So if you unlock a level 1 secret, you get 3 croutons. If you unlock a level 2 secret, you get 9 croutons. The formula is just 3 to the power of whatever level that you've achieved. And those croutons are then spent on votes. So the main purpose of the Sentry computer game is a guess who like game where you're browsing through. I think we have 20 million kind of fake generated people with a generational tree mapping back to the 1800s. The goal being that the audience tries to find the protagonist character, and once they do that, the teaser unlocks and drops. The podcast basically launches at that point, and that'll be the end of the ARG. But again, the croutons will still be a part of these people's wallets. The NFTs will still be a part of people's wallets. So if we want to reintegrate that into the podcast later on, or some other experience that we have that's attached to that this IP, the hope is that we can kind of keep reintegrating and no expectation that we'll ever put the ERC20 on like an exchange and try and make it like an actual speculative currency. I'm not really planning for that quite yet. I think it's more fun to just kind of like let it be a cool thing and that people feel like is a nice in-universe kind of reward for this.
Totally.
But I was also very interested in exploring like what does the UX for a blockchain-based app look like where the users aren't actively thinking about wallets and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I've tried to just push all that aside and have it be done in the background without the user's knowledge. So that's Chowder City and the Century Computer.
I mean, holy shit, that is amazing. I think you're definitely nailing the abstraction. I mean, that's something I can send to any one of my friends and they'd just be able to like go through it, without needing to read any white papers or understand anything. I mean, that's touching on something very powerful. But I think what's even more exciting here is the long-termism of this, where it's like anything you get, you keep. It's, it has a strong identity related to this and the podcast, of course, but the idea that anybody can walk away and retain, their progress and whatever social rewards or signal that's associated with that progress in any community anywhere. I mean, that's really, really, really cool. I mean, that's touching on some very, very awesome. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited to try this. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I will let you guys know once it's actually out. Probably still months out, but yeah, I had it as well. But yeah, that's just one example of like blockchain experimentation. And then one other benefit that's worth mentioning here is that all of the actual blockchain transactions are happening server side. So because I know the public address, the Ethereum address to reward stuff to, what's happening is I've got my private key, which is a whole new account, specifically for this project, stored as an environment variable on the server. And then I run a transaction server side to Polygon using that private key to send and reward the NFTs to the right people and the ERC20s to the right people, which is what allows this to all be done in the background. So what's nice about Polygon is because each of those transactions costs, a hundredth of a penny, I don't have to worry too much about costs. I can just put $20 in the account and expect that to run for the duration of the money left over. It's much more comparable to like AWS fees, essentially.
Like in terms of just like, it's basically like running a Lambda function or something
100%.
like this.
Yeah, the costs are actually pretty much aligned with how serverless functions are, where each transaction just costs a fraction of the cent. So you can let them scale up without really being nervous about, I don't want to go broke up this project either. So, I'm comfortable with the cost here.
But just to double check, the low transaction costs here come from the fact that you're running this on Polygon, or the fact that you're doing the single private key to basically everybody's wallets independently. Like, I guess what would the more expensive version of this look like?
If I were running the exact same code on the Ethereum network, with my server still being the one running those transactions, I would be responsible for those transaction fees. Meaning each thing that I mint might cost $100. So
this is
here Polygon is a very
Ethereum
obvious
versus
choice.
Polygon. Yep.
Yeah.
Got it.
Where with Ethereum and decentralized apps, there's an expectation that users pay for transaction fees. Whereas I think that it ends up being one of those primary UX hurdles that like the average person never thinks about, when I hit this button, it's going to cost me money. It's just
Yeah.
it's just expected
Very
that whoever's
true.
providing the service is going to handle that. So Polygon allows developers to do the same thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, just cut out all of the setup process as well, right? Like, I mean, that goes more in the abstraction layer, but I guess part of it's like the technical hurdle, but part of it is the cost, however small. It's just extra friction. So if you can get that out of the way, people just get onboarded quicker. Just
Yeah.
think about less things.
Yep. Because even if it costs a fraction of a cent to run a transaction, a user will still need to have that amount of currency in a wallet, which is such a massive hurdle at this point still.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Totally.
This thing is like this idea allows you to onboard so many people without the friction of all of that stuff. It is so good. Like,
But with all
yeah.
the benefits. It's
correct. Yeah.
that's a very nice trade-off.
This pattern, I think, is just, I mean, I can see a lot of people using it. So I want to play with it.
Yeah.
So I want to play with the idea of like figuring out if there are games like this that are suitable to what we're doing.
Yep.
To, you know, like onboard people through like some hurdle that is going to, you know, be something that is a proof of play.
Yep.
The type of people that we're looking to attract. So like, yeah, so that's what I was hoping, is that you guys would hear in the priming of this, so that we can play with all that. So it's cool, because I could have never explained that in a million years.
I mean, a screen share from the author is always like, you know, about as close to the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the one kind of thing that I am anticipating some questioning around is the private key generation stuff. Like, what is the proof that I'm not actually storing that private key somewhere?
Yeah.
I think the kind of work or the response to that, besides, you know, open sourcing stuff and verify and allowing users to verify it for themselves, which I might do, is just the fact that because Ethereum wallets, you know, they're generating in an infinite space. So the idea that is, unlike Web 2.0, where you're expected to kind of, you know, have one account for each service and one account for each thing, with Ethereum, you can spin up an infinite number of accounts and not worry about, you know, messing up the network or anything like that. So here, my kind of expectation is that users shouldn't be using these Chowder City wallets for anything else. Like, they shouldn't be putting their Ethereum into it. But if they want to transfer their Chowder City winnings or assets or whatever they get from this into a wallet that they, you know, is more personal to them or is their primary wallet or whatever, they can do that freely however they want.
Yep.
Right.
It's
It's basically like
So
this
that might be the kind of
temporary.
thing that I have to like. Yeah.
Could you put a UI on that somehow, where like it's I mean, you just create a bypass where you stick in the private key and then a wallet address or whatever, and then that can, yeah. I'm trying to think of the UX pattern here, where
I could collect their public Ethereum address, because that's the only thing I need to know on the back end is where to send stuff to.
Yeah.
So if users just input that makes it totally viable. I'm just choosing not to do that here because I want blockchain to be completely kind of behind the scenes.
It's a second order thing, like down the road. So
I guess for
as far
somebody
as
who's
like, go ahead.
very familiar with the ecosystem, they want to like fully trust you. You know, that little step might be available for them somewhere at the very bottom. You know, like, you know, just to prove that, like, it doesn't matter who generates it. Like, send us your own public key. But otherwise, you know, for I think like 99% of people, just like the normal path.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, and I think at least like saying that maybe these, like, not adding like some monetary value here is pretty important. Otherwise, people might start getting like up in arms, like, oh, well, now there's like money wrapped up in this thing that potentially is under the control of somewhere else. But if it's like purely just like, oh, like, here's an NFT that you have, and perhaps that maybe has some monetary value, but it's like, it also only gets revealed at the end that really what's going on. So it's it kind of seems like very fine. And maybe that, like, I was thinking of the same criticism, but I was also thinking, like, you just open source the code, and for the most part, maybe they're running some other code that you don't know of on the server itself, but it's
You gotta
pretty
trust somebody
minor.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're not.
especially for
Yeah.
like art projects like these, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, I mean, part of the thing here is that you can prototype these like economy situations without having to like worry about the stress of there being like a you know, somebody's life savings attached to the thing. So and keeping it off exchanges is a benefit in the short term, I think. So because I would love to play with currencies like this, and then, you know, incentive structures and these kinds of things, like, you know, games that like do oddball things and burning currencies and like, you know, all the sacrifice stuff, and like, you know, because there's a bunch of trust building bonding kinds of, like, I don't know what they are yet. This is where I'm trying to wrap my head around this more. I think we just need to sort of like role play or like design potential little games, and then get our novice like bad ideas out, and then even like potentially just play them together to see what the like frictions are and like how we can hack them and stuff. But I think a big part of the types of games that I'm interested in designing here are more collaborative than competitive. Like anything that is like hackable competitively, like with, you know, dominance attacks and these kinds of things, should break the game somehow, or there should be something like this. So like and I don't know who's doing this kind of stuff really. Other than like Mir seems to be kind of doing these things, but there's still hierarchies and stakes and stuff. So I don't know exactly what I'm saying here, but I think that
I was
there's
about to say, is it like something that like with the competition, like if you kind of try to compete versus collaborate, it just like starts burning the pool's coins or something like that?
Yeah,
that like would get released.
There's like negative inflation or these kinds of you know, models or something that I just had a sort of glimmer of this. So like yeah, the unlock is a collaborative dynamic, and if you stop collaborating, the currency starts disappearing, kind of thing. Or the idea that like you know, even doing things like unlocking a black box requires the burning of currency, right? So like, or to see something, you need to, you know, or you need to contribute to get currency, like these kinds of things. And then, or, you know, donation structures where like you were trying to induce others to play, and you can stake something this way, and I don't know. They're all very vague, but yeah.
I'm picturing like a cartoon stick of dynamite with a long rope ahead of it as like a timer kind of function of like, all right, here's the all the currency is going to get burned if you guys don't figure out how to stop the fuse early on, and it requires people working together.
Yeah, you know, so like sort of ridiculous tensions, I think is a good model for that. And like, you know, it can be tied to like sub games basically, where you are ideally long term. I want people having like toolkits to build games to like they get put into an arena that has this dynamic where the thing is going to blow up unless you accomplish some like collaborative something. I don't know what it is. And then, you know, if there are voting mechanisms in place so that the community can self-organize this. So like headless game design is the like sort of ultimate version of this, but at first you need sort of game masters, I think. So I'm starting to like poke around the like role-playing worlds because they've got a lot of information on these kinds of things. And they've been doing it with Dungeons and Dragons for like 40 years or whatever. But yeah, I'm just starting that. But yeah, I like that. That's cool. Yeah, it's some contribution towards like, so field of play is something like, I don't know, design an interesting file system or like some piece of the protocol, or like a UI pattern for this particular problem. And then the collaborative thing that you're doing where like there's only, you can only figure this out together, like that mentality over and over and over again. Games that can only be figured out collectively. Like either through, whatever the stressors are there, whatever the tensions are, even because it's just so hard, or because it requires like, it's like the escape rooms or whatever, where you have to like 3 people have to press a button or something like this, this kind of thing. Yeah. I've never designed anything like this, so it's just yeah.
It's interesting. It almost like, to me, starts sounding like in the game itself, you're adding constraints to the design space, which actually makes the game. And then that starts like bubbling up things naturally from it.
Yeah, and the hope there is that like through the play, like you'll start to get a picture of where the tensions and frictions are in the larger field, and then you just move towards where it's most fun to play next, right? Yeah, I don't know how that works, but that's my sense that that's the case. I mean, it's just like kids playing around, and like you're playing a narrative game, and then this happens, and then okay, that happens, and then you know where to go. Like people in a hive, in a swarm, will know how to do this. You just have to give them tooling so that the and constraints like this, like funnel them into a field of play.
Yep.
But yeah, that's as far as I've gotten so far. This is helping though.
Did Dave and Kristen, did you guys end up watching any Taskmaster yet?
Not yet. I've got it on the list.
There's so there for John and CJ, there's a British like game show, panel show called Taskmaster, that I think plays around with a lot of like kind of game concepts that might be relevant here. But some tasks, the format of the show is basically they have this house where comedians come one at a time to complete tasks. They all have the same tasks. They're like arbitrary kind of things like get these 3 exercise balls to the yoga mat to the top. And they're challenging because the top of the hill is very steep, and as you get one exercise ball up there, and you run down to get the next one, that first one might start rolling down the hill, and it's just like challenging in that way, for example. But a lot of them, they have kind of special ways of reading the task or interpreting the task correctly. So, for example, the way that one was solved was the person just brought the yoga mat down to the bottom where the exercise balls already were, because that satisfied the terms of the task. I'm not explaining it well. Anyways, occasionally they do group tasks where they bring together a few of the comedians to figure stuff out. So they've done stuff like get to 10 points, and it's not entirely clear how to get to 10 points.
Oh,
Popped out.
he died.
Yep.
That's weird.
Oh, welcome back. We lost chat
Weird.
right about 10 points.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, so they've got like all sorts of kind of game-like stuff and expect people to like figure out like, oh, maybe shooting a ball into the hoop gets 1 point. But they don't make it clear what the actual rules are. It turns out at the end that complimenting each other and saying like, oh, good try or something.
Oh, got it. So okay,
stuff like that with like hidden rules.
Yeah. That's great.
Like second order incentives almost. That's fascinating.
I'm gonna end up binging this whole thing.
Yeah,
is there like so there's like 10 seasons, yeah?
11.
Yeah, I would start with 5 or 7 and start from the first episode.
Okay.
Well, I'll have an encyclopedia of all these things soon. I mean, it's also super fun sounding, so
Yeah.
easy research.
Fun
And
research.
it's British comedy, which is probably extraordinarily entertaining watching people figure this out. Yeah.
There was another one that was more recent where it was a group task. People start on one side of a lawn and have to get to the other side of the lawn without sirens going off, but it's not clear what it is that triggers the sirens. They have all sorts of things like alternating kind of like red and green and black like stepping stones along the way. So people are inventing in their own head, like, oh, maybe it's making sure that you don't step on the red ones. Maybe it's making sure that you don't step on every third one or whatever. And just kind of running them over and over again. And the winner is whoever gets to the end without the sirens going off first. And in that case, it turned out to be that making noise, if you're silent for 7 seconds, then that's what triggers the sirens. So it's just the process of making sound. throughout the process. But it's really fascinating watching people figure this stuff out on the fly, and the theories that they come up with for what the rules might actually be versus what they end up being. And then occasionally people winning without even realizing what the rules actually were. It's just pure luck that they stumbled into the right. Yeah.
No.
So I don't know, yeah, when Dave's talking about like collaborative game formats like that definitely comes to mind.
Yeah.
Those
examples. It's interesting, like you describing this, it reminds me of a game, like a very similar game is like where you don't know the rules of the game, and like actually the game is figuring out the rules of the game, kind of. My friend is like, it's the green glass door, and you're trying to figure out what are the rules to let things through the green glass door. And eventually, like he's like, this can go through the green glass door, that can go through this cannot go through the green glass door. And eventually, like, oh, you know, only certain items can go through the green glass door, and it has to have like double letters or something like that. And you're like, oh, okay, it's interesting and fun. And we had like a big group of people that are all like confused, but like thinking like maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
Yeah, I'm very
I feel like
curious.
That mechanism can definitely be applied to a lot of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
That was all I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah,
I think a good starting point is onboarding. Like, how do you invite people into the thing with a game that is relational and collaborative?
Solving the thing, solving the initial game or games or
to
set
join.
of games.
Yeah.
Like as a recruitment method, if you are, choosing for, again, it's not personality type because that's impossible, but like if you are good at solving these kinds of games, then you will probably be good at, or if you enjoy solving these kinds of games, you will probably enjoy participating in this community. And the community is built around creating more types of these games. So with, increasing complexity and funness. Then there are classes of play, I think, this kind of thing. So, yeah.
What do you mean by classes of play?
So, like Shahruz had this in the was it 32 Swords? Like there are roles, there are classes, right? Like types of players, in sort of role playing, you have like, I don't know what it is, wizards and bards and, this kinds of thing.
Sure.
They are balanced towards a certain type of problem or whatever. They work with other types of people in certain types of way. But I don't think explicitly designing that stuff is necessarily, I don't know, like there may be primitives that work here that are like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, I don't know if there's archetypes in the system or something like that. And then you're like, I want to play as this archetype, and you can play as any of them and in any of the games. And in doing this, like you can sort of discover the style of play that you can help the most or something. Right. So there's a little bit of a push-pull on that, but I don't know what the minimum set of archetypal information that you need to play the game without it being too narrative, because what we're trying to do is have something that is generative and creative, and so you need minimal but frustrating bounds so to induce creativity.
Minimal but frustrating bounds. I like that.
Yeah. But also, if there's, go ahead.
I like what you've done, Shahruz, where there's different levels too, like just for getting in the front door.
Yeah.
And then does that continue over time too? And then you get greater access to the world, kind of thing. It could be greater access to Discord channels, for example. Like that makes sense. Like that's
all I've got so far, and I'm planning to improvise what other value comes from those level systems. But yeah, in particular, I like the current leveling system because it's not about your level of access to an existing network or your popularity or how much you can afford to spend. It's purely by chance that you're going to type in the right thing that unlocks the right level, or how much time you're able to spend just trying stuff out. So it's nicely accessible for all in that sense.
Yeah, and you can play with identity structures with this too, because like, if you start getting like, I'm a level 4, right? and in future seasons you can change that around to, at the hierarchy, you're at the bottom of the stack if you're a level 4, and there's all these weird, because it's just a label, right? Like it's not meritocratic in any way. Or you can play with the idea that it is, and then I don't know. I
mean, leaving it ambiguous is gonna do all sorts of wacky shit, right? Like
Yep,
people are gonna be like, well, level 4 is obviously better than level 3, but in fact, level 3 actually gives you something that level 4 doesn't have. You need to like do some sort of cross level collaboration, or you need to move into a different level. Like it's not that you necessarily unlock 3 and everything below it, but like moving to 4 actually requires you to give up some things, and so then the slice of hierarchy
lateral
looks
movement.
different.
Yeah, that's cool.
Mhm.
Interesting. Yeah, so arbitrary bucketing as part of the initial gaming, just to give people cohorts, and then structures within the cohorts where people can play games and then sort of take on the identity of their cohort and build that out. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it builds itself that way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
There was a concept from a Kurt Vonnegut book that was the author's like least favorite book he ever wrote. Like he denounced it basically. But part of what happens in that book is it's set in like an post-apocalyptic United States, and the concept of family and like community has broken down. So what the government does, the main character becomes the president in like this broken down United States. And what he does is introduces a new naming system where each citizen gets a name and a number that becomes their last name. So it could be like Daffodil 22. And the idea is that everybody that is a daffodil is your cousin. Everybody that's 22 is your sibling. And that, when somebody who is also a daffodil is in need of something, you're expected to treat them like family and so on. So that's another mechanic that I really like, the idea of applying it to something like this, of just like arbitrary assignment of names that they can attach their own association or value system to.
Yeah, they're little hangers for whatever. Yeah. It's cool. Yeah, this is these things. My brain just starts spinning because there's like so many possibilities
There's a lot of room here. Yep.
Yeah.
How much lore would you want, or are you envisioning on this? Because it sounds like it could be kind of a lightweight layer where you set up some primitives and then let people fill in their own meanings and develop that and improvise and generate that themselves. Could also be a little bit more prescriptive in terms of designing out a few things and setting up a series of goals that are more obvious that people are aspiring to within that structure.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like the types of people that I've encountered in the like tools for thought world, I don't know what their relationship to these kinds of games are, right? Like, and if it's even, we're trying to attract these types of people at first, right? So I think this is part of like, what are the types of people that we're looking to draw in, and what are their relationships to things like, heavy duty storytelling, right? Like how, I don't know, like that's like when you get 10, 20, 30, 100 people together, like, what kinds of mythology and understand, if you have like a bunch of fantasy fans, right, like Dungeons and Dragons people who've been playing that for a long time, like they have no problem like inhabiting a character and like doing voices, and if they're actors or in entertainment or something like this, the mentality is like a lot more open to that kind of thing. So there might be like some sort of skill method. So yeah, like, is it more of a just a more playful version of collaborating along, like making tooling, right? Like, so it's probably thin on the narrative. It doesn't need that. And then what you get is like sort of like guilds, like something like this, where like we are the types of people who work in this type of way, right? And then you develop a sort of like,
here's our story.
Yeah, like, and rather than it being dragons and you know, or like, you know, a sentient computer or something like this. But I think, yeah, that my instinct is that it is less narrative at first. But I don't know. Like, the stuff that I've done in the past has had the feeling of a lot of creativity in general, right? Like, and sort of creative, like I'm thinking of the marketing I've done. It's an invitation to play, but once you're in the actual interactions, it's just it's sort of
Open. Yeah.
yeah, like, so yeah, it's more, yeah, I don't know. That one I don't
Makes
have a good
sense.
answer for. Yeah, I don't
No,
know.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
An improv stage doesn't set up lore, but it sets
Situation, yeah. I think we lost him.
cut out there for a sec. Can you
Yep,
guys hear me
you're
now?
back.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. So you're saying an improv stage.
Uh-oh.
Oh, again.
Mhm.
It's always back to back. Oh, no, I think you're good.
I think I need to connect my phone better for my internet
Okay.
connection. So give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm like
John,
thinking about near term versus long term, which is hard.
Some,
You just mute him.
Yep.
I'm
Fine.
still on the call, so I'm going to be right back.
There we go.
Short term
Yeah, like the
versus long
near term versus like longer term, and you kind of want to have an idea about like the longer term direction to design the near term. It's like the near term being like an invitation to participate like in the first season, which is like a recruitment kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, did he mute it himself?
No, sorry.
Cool.
My mom's friends were over. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
Mom party. Yeah, so you were talking about sort of like setting the stage for improv or these kinds of things.
Oh yeah, just the fact that an improv stage doesn't set up the lore, but it just sets up that environment where there's an expectation that there's certain
Yeah.
certain rules.
Yeah.
Got it. Yep.
It can be light on the actual. Yeah.
Have
Which I
you
think-
run into? Go ahead.
That seems to align with what we're doing because we have an opinion on, we want to be working in a certain space, right?
Hmm.
That's sort of like what we're setting. I mean, relational is kind of vague right now, but like relational how, and once we can like sort of articulate that, and then there's aspects of that we can ask people to play in without being too prescriptive. I mean, there's certain times where it's possible that there are specific like bounties, for example, or games where it's not improv. I mean, maybe it's improv, but we're looking for an answer to this, and maybe it's it could be improv, it could be like specific, and we'd like people to play this game because we think it will produce the right, I don't know.
It'll produce an option set that helps move the game forward. Like, you know, in that case, some lore or some artifacts to play the next round of the game, or, you know, like, we need a logo or whatever, that, you know, that's the simplest one I can think of. And like, you know, how you derive that logo and what the sense of the thing can be arrived at by a bunch of different things. And, you know,
well, you could have a bunch of different games too, where different people are like, we think we know a really good way to come up with a good logo, and there's like 5 different groups, and they all do something different, and then you can compare and see, you're like, oh, interesting, that's how you came at this, and like what you produced is like way different than what the people over here produced, and they use this like set of gameplay.
There's
kind of a fun one to start with, or to do early.
I think that, you know, things like naming, things like branding, like identity stuff gives a shared sense of community on that front. So
Yep.
yeah, and our approach to that, like, you know, seasonality and logos and these kinds of things, like, you know, the ethos of the community that is that it is adaptable and changing. And but there is lineage to the logo or whatever it is, and it's not a foregone conclusion that you just have the best designer produce some beautiful thing. It may be that, like, you want a season where ugliness is the signal, and you know, this like polished perfection is an anti-signal. So you can, yeah, change the field of play to sort of loosen things up, or you know, these kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's cool. I was going to mention there's a, I don't know if you've run into Keith Johnstone at all. Um, he's like sort of the grandfather of improv. And he has a book called Impro, and then another book called Impro for Storytellers. And most of it is just improv games, like that he has made up over decades and decades and decades. And I think it's probably like a really solid resource for um, finding novel, like collaborative games and these kinds of things. And he goes into a ton of the psychology of like what freezes people up and how to move through that. And you know, the he has all these mentalities about like being ordinary. Don't go up there and, like, you know, make up all kinds of crazy shit. Just do the thing that makes the most, you know, just that comes to mind first, and then you have all of this junk that needs to come out of your. Anyways, it's a good read. If nothing else, it helps you understand improvisers. So I'm gonna go through the storytelling book to see if there's any stuff to steal.
That could be like a
Send
really
highlights.
awesome place. Yes.
Yeah.
I think improv as like the whole stage thing, it makes it interesting because there's like a certain level of like openness that requires like is
Yeah.
required in improv too. Is like you need to be like open to the ideas or whatever's going on. Like something comes at you, you're like, okay, I guess just gotta run with it.
Yeah, it gives you a way to be real stupid. Like performative stupidity can produce a lot of amazing stuff. Most of it's junk, but it's fun to create the junk, right? And like once you get into flow with people, I mean, there's nothing better than that. So if there's a way to like sort of take these things and use them in situations where you can build software, I mean, I think it would be so fun. So yeah.
What do you guys think about tokenizing the relational thing? Do you see like a role of tokens in the system? Like there's some like currency, and it, not that it's necessarily like fiat, like exchangeable.
I think that it's a game mechanic, and I think that like people have such a fundamental understanding of property, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can play with there. Like there's also trust and vulnerability, like leverage there. Like, you know, if there is an ascribed value, even if it is like sort of the swarm ascribes this thing a minimal value that like, you know, it can mediate some types of exchange, and then when you leave it out, that produces a different style of gameplay. If it like, I do like the idea that sensing the like economic flows within a game system like this could help you understand and produce a better game, you know. And then if there is the ability for the thing to monetize itself through this thing longer term, then it can become self-sufficient. Like it can self-organize and become self-sufficient, and that's going to be a lot easier if there is a sort of economic model, even at the simplest, stupidest version of that early days. Because you can sort of project out into the future, and you can have like economic designers and players in the system who are coming up with novel sort of structures there that could potentially trade like with the outside world. That movement after a few seasons or however many would be a place that I would like to go. Yeah, and in the meantime, like if there is like value being created and exchange and like collaboration, then bringing in outside money to make it so that people can play more often and we could actually work on this thing. That'd be nice. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
I hadn't thought of, so when you tokenize something in a system like this or have some sort of currency or like value that's public facing, it helps show economic flow so people can see what's trending, what's important, what people care about. Like that helps with navigation and sort of cultural norms. Yeah, that's interesting. I do like the idea that as it makes sense that it could make the leap into outside of just that gameplay world and have some sort of financial value for buying things outside of, or and then bringing money in too. Like that's interesting.
Yeah, the ideal scenario here, or what aspirational scenario, is that there is an internal economy and it is operating one way, and then it maybe the exchange isn't directly tokenized. There is an external token that the community can exchange with the outside world, but it, like, if that thing starts to accrue a ton of resource, it doesn't screw up the gameplay because you get like status hierarchies and stuff. So if you can continue to play within the thing and everybody has got a sort of mentality where you're trying to continue to play the game rather than collect or hoard or anything like this. But the value of what is being accrued within the game, within the gameplay, can be exchanged with the outside world, either through service or through offering or through, like software, whatever it is, right? Processing of something, or, putting things on chain, who knows? And then that can come into the swarm as like there's a central repository of the currency that can be distributed through voting and this kind of thing, to continue the play or to move into new territory in the outside, right? So you get this sort of barrier between, you hopefully don't fall into the inequality traps, but it's, this is so speculative. I mean, I have a feeling that is possible in some way, but you're going to have to fuck it up a million times to get there. So, but yeah.
For like experimenting with the RC20 stuff, like the fungible tokens, the currency like ones, for my own stuff, I found it helpful to break them out into buckets. So there's access. So like it's like the FWB Discord, where you need to have 55 of that currency to be able to access the Discord in the first place. But besides that, there's no other kind of use for that token. Governance, meaning the amount of tokens that you hold has some kind of proportion to how much you can vote and how much that affects some direction for the overall thing. Utility, tokens where you have to actually spend them to do something that may have some associated cost, or not. And then the last one, I think Kristen had just mentioned it, that use, but I don't know what to call it.
Like cultural norms.
Yeah, the over, maybe it encompasses all of it, but the kind of social signals and a sense of understanding of what's important and what's not, I guess. So yeah, I guess those 4 buckets may be useful to think about.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, that is useful.
Yeah.
So what happens when you layer on top of what we're talking about, the concept of, Dave and I have been listening to and reading a lot about like decentralized organizations or decentralized autonomous organizations. Like, what does that add to like this conversation? Like in what you're building, Shahruz, with Chowder City, is that considered like one of these things or not at all? Because
Yeah, I don't know who ultimately is the arbiter of what these words actually mean. I think if I chose to call it a DAO, I don't think anybody would really have a problem with it. But for my own definition, I view DAOs as things that are high on the governance use in terms of the currency.
Yep.
Meaning having access to that currency is mostly about driving the direction of that organization or company or business or whatever entity it is. And I'm light on that on the Chowder City side of things. It is governance in the sense that you're spending crouton to vote, but it's all gameplay. It's not really affecting some larger direction of how I'm going to build things.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's so much gray area here. Like, I've found myself, because I like how I'm not an engineer, but I sort of have an engineering like mindset. I like to know how things work. And with the DAOs and the DOs and decentralized organizations and all of these different things, I'm like trying to figure out how they work, and it's not like that. Like, they all work in different ways. So it's sort of like the way I have to read these things and like onboard it is sort of like let it wash over me, and there's like a pattern to it. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if people call them these things because it's a shorthand for people who are building something similar, that like we're doing something similar. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's a scene, you
Yeah.
need scene language, so
Yeah.
so that you can
It
find
helps
the
with
others.
orientation. I sent an article out. What
Yes.
was that, Vitalik, Dave? The one with the DAOs and the DOs, yeah. That has a 4x4 grid of how like involved people are in like the central and like edge mechanics of the entity, and like how that helps sort of nail down, like, is it a DAO? Is it actually decentralized, or is it more of like a regular organization, which is like human? So it's interesting, but it's all gray area. Like, you could say that you're in any quadrant and sort of justify it how you want.
Yeah, I just look at these things as like
It's a signaling,
it
I
makes
guess.
yeah, it's searchable so that you can move through the space, like, but ultimately you just design the thing that makes the most sense using the stack you've got at hand and trying to hack it together however it makes sense. So yeah, I don't know, like, it may be that we don't want to call the thing a DAO if it is in fact that thing, because it'll attract a lot of attention from people who are interested in finding DAOs. So and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know. So but yeah, like some of the more like heavy-handed governance stuff is like these like venture firms that are sort of popping up, that they're pooling money, and they're the contracting is much more important because they're sharing resource and making investments and these kinds of things. I'd like to get to a place where we could do that. That's a long ways off. Unless we find a bunch of these like crypto whales and they just love what we're doing and they want to give us all their Ethereum, and I'm not going to turn that down. No.
I think one of the interesting things, at least, like, I don't know if it's specifically with DAOs or more like the governance aspect, is like, how do the coins get distributed to people in the first place? Like, in terms of voting, like, it seems like that you could just arbitrarily define it like any way you want. So like that could be even like an interesting game to play, is like different kind of mechanisms of creating like some governance structure with tokenization. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you try to come up with different games to incent like different types of voters. The like witness me model, where you have somebody who like lights themselves on fire for coins, and then you have something else that's more collaborative. There's all kinds of ridiculous, virtually, obviously. Like, but yeah, like this is the proof of play things. Then you have airdropping. I like the idea of something participatory. Some kind of simple interaction, even if it is just like join one of these black box games with strangers, which is like a sort of vulnerable act, and then that gets you through the door to do something, and then I don't know, maybe there's a currency there, and then this idea that like you need to spend the currency in some other collaborative way so you're just creating a chain of like bonding throughout the thing until you're in a good faith field. so that like the likelihood that somebody who is a bad actor will have gone through these steps is pretty low. And early days, there's not a lot of the appeal is going to be in playing the game, because there's not a lot of like glory to be had or like money to be made. It's mostly that, you know, it's gonna be people for whom this is like the most fun thing to do, ideally. So yeah, evidently
Yeah,
I've thought of it.
there's
Yeah, go ahead.
Communal
there's
aspect of it. Go ahead.
Yep. Well, that's kind of what, yeah, I was gonna say is like one of the things that hit me when Kristen brought up just like this question is multi-sig wallets, because they just broke my brain the first time I learned about them. The fact that you could have a set of people that has access to money, but only a threshold of those people, arbitrary, has the ability to move that money. And that opens up some interesting things with groups where you could potentially have a multi-sig across different groups. And it's like you almost incentivize like opposing teams to come to some sort of consensus among themselves to get stuff going. And I think like where it really gets interesting for me is that each one of these essentially elements of currency, whatever they are, has, you know, obviously the whole history associated with it. So there could almost be the sense of like, you know where it's traveled through. Like we don't know where a dollar bill has been, but you know, if would my use of a dollar bill be different if I knew that like it was at some point spent in something that was congruent with what I'm spending it on now, and who else that I know has spent, you know, this class of currency. And yeah, I imagine that kind of plays into some of that collaborative role playing as well.
Yeah, what's coming up here is the what is it, Hegelian dialectic, or what is it, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So like that's a gameplay dynamic idea. You know, you could put people who are sort of like in opposing teams, and the way you win the game is to create some synthesis of the thing. And that dynamic, I think, is that basic principle is undergirding the whole thing that we're doing. Like, because that's relationality. You are coming together with multi perspectives, and then you have to figure out like some way to coordinate to create a thing that is the you know, is a whole of the sum of the parts in the group. And
it's transcendent.
Yeah.
Which that is like, I mean, societally speaking right now, we're really struggling with that. Like there's so many like with the culture where there's so many like, well, these people are like this and these people are like that. And so many people who are coming from a good place are just like, what do we do with that? How when you meet someone like this, or if you're, I don't know, like a lot of people with like their parents, like my parents watch Fox News and this is how they're like presenting information and I don't know how to interact with them. Yeah, there's a pattern here that if people could figure out and learn, through game, and then how to bring those things together and then have something emerge from it that works for both ends, like that would be such a good thing for the world. Even in small doses, if people can just understand the patterning of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if
filters for it.
Yeah, like if this logic is implicit in the gameplay and the games are fun, that's what it comes down to. The games have to be fun. Like you don't have to hit people over the head with Hegel, because it's the same thing as the wallets.
Don't do
like
that.
just give them the logic through a gameplay mechanic. And you know, if they come out the other side feeling, I mean, this is the black boxing stuff has produced these feelings where, you know, you come in and you're like worried and you have to submit something and you don't know what's going to come out the other side, and then when you come back together there's this opening and like, oh, we're all part of this little thing together. Just inducing that like togetherness in a field of play is great. Like, you know, if the byproduct of that type of play is also that it's productive, all the better. But it can just be silly too. That's fine.
I'm just doing a time check because I scheduled this for an hour and a half. I don't know if people have to jump, just to be respectful. Cool.
I'm good.
I figured not, but you know.
way to time check.
I wonder.
there-
So I
Go ahead.
go ahead, Shahruz.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if I was going to go off on a tangent.
We both
Oh.
tangents.
Yeah,
Yeah,
CJ,
yeah,
were you
tangent.
not tangent? Yeah.
It was not very tangential. I don't think it was tangential. I guess like thinking about the multi-perspectival kind of thing, it immediately, like, I think when we're getting together on, this black boxing thing, I mean, it did evoke this, like, at least for me, and like, I don't know, like some kind of nervousness before it was the reveal, and then the reveal like really
Yeah.
like tamped it down.
Yeah.
But even within that, there was like some level of trust in the fact that like we had previous conversations and knew we were somewhat aligned. I
Yep.
was thinking, what if you totally threw people together like of like very diverse backgrounds and like maybe do have fundamental disagreements, and like what happens when that black box is really is
Yeah.
like that opening Pandora's box, like like what
It can be.
Thought about that a little. You probably, so like we had to do warm-up exercises to even get to the point where we could start talking about things that were like a little bit deeper and more vulnerable.
yeah.
So there's probably like pathways of relationship building before you want to, like, and this is where levels come in. Like you don't get to just jump to, this is where it's probably not gamified, this type of thing, where you can't gamify it in the sense that if you guess the code, you get to jump to this level. Because if you jump to that level, you might fuck yourself up because you're just like, holy shit, I didn't know I was asking for that, and it's too much now.
Yeah.
So you sort of have to, yeah, there might be tracks where you have to work your way up because it's, yeah, vulnerable. It's
Well,
intimate.
I think, yeah, that's like very interesting. And I wonder if that's maybe one way into onboarding is, I don't know, like, I mean, it would be interesting to see what would happen to begin with, but like, can you incentivize people to like make it to some like level of endpoint, and that endpoint maybe releases coins or something that like everyone is incented in the system to collaborate and like respect each other's viewpoints throughout the whole process. Exactly what that looks like maybe is different, but like maybe you come up with some piece of media where everyone collaborated to create it or something, whatever it be. I don't know.
Yeah, it's things that like are small vulnerabilities. Like they don't need to be and
Big.
you're
Yes.
yeah, because the big stuff people will just, I mean, some people
Immediately
are all about it, and that's fine. Like the ideal scenario here is that like, I don't know what it is like and everybody's vulnerabilities are different, but generally like sharing something like personal of some nature, right? So in a protected context, like and what the personal information is. I mean, this could just be basic storytelling, right? Or a field of play where people can relate to each other. There's the Warm Data Labs by Nora Bateson, and my basic understanding of this is she doesn't have a lot of information on anywhere, but they're doing a lot of these things. They're usually in person. I think they're doing them on Zoom. We've talked about them before. But basically you have a group of, dozens of people, I think, and they're split into sort of rooms, and there is a context that's created in that room, and then a discussion happens in that context. And then you shuffle the people into different rooms and then have them enter into a new context and discussing the things that they were discussing before. And then you do this a few times. And what this encourages is like just getting way off of your scripts, the things that people normally talk about, right? And if you do this intergenerationally, and there is a sort of exchange of like relational information, like interpersonal relation, like that is a lot deeper than talking about what you saw on Fox News or something like, or whatever the hell it is, right?
Right.
So, and you close the gap on that, I think, or what she talks about is people, get to a place pretty quickly where they are talking to each other,
Yeah.
And so, like, you don't have to have people, like, I think that there's a bare minimum that people want to play and that they understand that you're playing a game. Like, so we've all played games with people who are just like not into it and like it just doesn't work, and that's going to happen. That's fine. Like
Totally.
yeah, I don't know.
Just one more thought on that is that identity, I think, may play a role. And if I was putting text into an anonymous online, well, no, not anonymous, again, like we're talking about pseudo anonymous here, but something still tied to my identity, I'm probably going to be more vulnerable versus like a Twitter thread where,
Yeah.
like, everybody like knows, it's my identity, right? And especially when you can get like some level of customization of that, profile where it's like I can choose to expose certain elements about myself or myself in this specific interaction. And yeah, I think it'd be very different versus like joining a Discord server under my real name, right? Like that very different to playing entering a game where I am one of seven and nobody really knows who else is in here. And I mean, I think it'll build the right environment for that.
Yeah, I'm curious about that, the style of play there, and like, because I mean, yeah, if you're affording people like role playing opportunities, right? Yeah, I don't know. That'll be interesting to experiment with.
Shahruz, you were gonna.
Yeah,
what's your tangent?
I was gonna pitch a mechanic or something to think about because I think about like little building blocks. So exquisite corpse, you guys familiar with
Yeah,
what that means?
I forget it.
No.
Yeah.
If I'm not wrong about my own memory of it, it's that game format where people are drawing a section of something with the idea that somebody will come and connect and be a part of a bigger thing. But that could be drawing, it could be text, it could be it's essentially the concept that you can contribute one small section of something and that somebody will come and connect it to a larger piece, and all of these things will ultimately connect. I wonder if that mechanic could be applied to profiles of finding commonalities between people, or any of these other things that we talked about. Might just be like a useful mechanism.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that pattern is very resonant in what we're trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We can't say like it's a collective thing, and we are not the collective. Like we're just people that, I don't know, stumbled upon something first, or there's probably other people working on something similar, but yeah, we want to grow it.
So yeah, I mean another part of that popped up there is that like part of the initial gameplay is that the contributions that you're making to the early games are building your profile to play in the system. So like there is a certain amount of like, looking at the I don't know, the lineage of play, like taking a look at how people approach their play, like, and you could design games around like building a profile for people, like to like sort of get at what they're interested in without them understanding that that's what they're doing. Like building themselves a profile that is less about like what we did earlier. I'm this person who did, like the introduction of like where you came from and what you're doing, more about like what your interest is within the context of play. And yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I think that it's surveying. There's like psychological surveying and these kinds of things that you could do here that like, or even individual like solo play where you have to sort of interrogate yourself in some way or write to yourself in some way and then share that writing as the next step. And then this is an extremely vulnerable because you were writing it in a way that is for you. And then to move forward, you need to share it, but it's already like locked in, right? And so, yeah, these kinds of things. Again, without it being like overtly, like we're not asking them for deepest, darkest secrets, but it's a small vulnerability that may like earlier, I wrote a little thing in a copywriting voice and I shared it with the rest of everybody. I'll send it over to you, Shahruz. But like, I haven't been using that voice and it's in a sort of like salesy kind of thing, like collapsing the idea that we're working on. And it is nerve-wracking to share this thing because I don't know what I'm going to get back and like what the feedback anyway. So anyways, but yeah, so the exquisite corpse thing too is like another type of black boxing where Kristen has mentioned these a few times, like like somebody writes a little blip and then you leave a trailing something so that, you know, the next person can build on top of it. And then
Yes.
I think that there's a second step here that would work with that like pulls it all together. I don't know if it's like another like style of media or something where you discuss the thing, or, you know, like
you could do it blind where you don't know what you're building, right? And everyone sort of, this is sort of what warm data labs is. We don't know what we're trying to find, but we'll find it together in this weird process. It's sort of like a magic like thing. It's really, I mean, I still don't know how to explain it. I haven't participated in it either, and they're not doing them in person. I keep looking it up. But so that one is sort of like you let the consensus emerge of whatever it is that, you find it together, versus we want to build something like this. And then you can self-organize, like, okay, maybe you take that part, you take that part, and you don't really know how it's all going to fit together. And we'll keep going apart and coming back, going apart, coming, like, because you're building different pieces of it.
Yeah. Let's do it.
I mean, that's what we're proposing to do. We're just trying to figure out how to layer on game dynamics on top of that. And using a technology that's new for us. So that's, I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not trivial.
But this is where like the Web3 stuff, it just feels like it fits more naturally with this, like where we started in the very beginning of the conversation. Shahruz, you said something, I took a couple notes. Yeah, so like the parallels with RSS, like it's communication and like content, like it's information transfer, but it also has to do with money and like the social like aspect, like all of that's built in, or has the capacity to be built in pretty easily with Web3. So it makes sense to use it. So it's like, I don't know how you would not use it, like, or why you wouldn't use it, even though it is new. And it's, I mean, Shahruz has figured out a lot of like base dynamics, which is so useful to see examples in practice. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, one of the things that popped up with that was like there is a style of like sort of this holographic media thing that we've been talking about, and then like a sort of protocol for this, or a standard that I hope will develop around this, that building tooling around helping communicate this idea. Like some of the games are trying to build that tooling so that there is infrastructure so that the community can communicate out like in these styles of media that don't really exist yet, right? So like that's the like there's a sort of pre-press or publishing kind of tooling here, and like whether or not we build that ourselves or if that's a collaborative effort, I would like it to be a collaborative effort because there's so much to do there. But if we provide the sort of protocol to build on, and then it's about interfaces to like build into that stuff, and then if you end up with having people who are participating in the community who can then build something that is very useful, and then they can go sell this thing and make money off of it, great. That means that we've done something interesting here, right? But yeah, like I don't know what that sort of holographic media stuff is. There are new forms I think that will develop that are like multifaceted, and it's not just text, not just audio, not just whatever. There are interactive components here, and they bundle in a certain way. And there are viewers
like
that can
corpse thing too. Like you're coming at it from different angles and building this thing, right? Collectively.
Yeah, it can be. I think that there's like the multi-perspective kind of view on this stuff. Like so the place I've been thinking a lot about that is it like the book as an entity, or like it has a composition and a linearity, and then pages, and they stick together in a certain way, and then you can do a lot with that mentality, and they stick in a library, and there's this general standard to the thing or whatever, and then you get a printing press and you can replicate them and all this other stuff. So we may be pre-printing press here, we're trying to figure out the forms, right? Like even Shahruz is playing with that with the dynamic like media types, right? So like and you could have a network of these kinds of things and tooling that would help people build them, right? So I think that is a really good example of how like there is a sort of a game mechanic built in, and it's also like it's the way that it works, and it's replicable, and then you could just add different scripting and different community types on top of it. So what are the types of things like that that look more I don't know. Anyways, these kinds of things, I think. So tooling to build that stuff. I'm starting to lose. I'm flagging here. The COVID's hitting me.
Yeah, I think exactly what the tooling looks like is interesting. Like I think one like fundamental question is like, what is a relationship? Because it seems like a relationship can be so many things.
Yeah.
And how is that actually expressed in some other form? Like for me, it's kind of hard to visualize like what that means. I can see how like the relationships are like deeply connected everywhere, but what does that look like? Kind of in like more computerized interface. Yeah, I think that's where I also start to get a little bit like
is this where we get into like the
lost
graph database stuff?
Well, I think I kind of had like a little bit of insight into that last night, where that was coming from, and I think it was coming from. I was thinking like, well, I think a lot of it was I talked to Barty the previous day, and thinking about Rome and like bidirectional links and all this. I'm like, why does the internet not have this? And like, it's just like really not part of the protocol that like the internet was built on top of, it seems like. And it would be, what is a way that you could build a protocol that is more natural to support like this kind of relationship building between things, like making sure that these bidirectional links are established. And I think maybe I was just trying to hijack the concept of a blockchain itself, because I'm like, oh, blockchains are operating as like a worldwide distributed computer as it is, and like in a very like broadcast kind of network sense. So if you could abstract away like on the front end, like you just like I imagine like if I had a piece of media, that piece of media is like maybe its own like blockchain or has a blockchain behind it or something, right? And then I write a response to that. Well, now that response is a new form of media, but maybe it's also like tacked on somehow to the other one. You say,
related.
oh, like yeah, you're like, this is the hash of that thing, so I'm gonna go point to that thing, and then now someone can point to this hash, and like all these hashes start interacting with each other in a more distributed way. But I think it might have been like a weird kind of like mental hack on top of a blockchain that maybe need not be a blockchain itself. It was more just like, this is a distributed method of computing that exists out there in the world, and is like and is a protocol to begin with. So it'd be like hijacking a protocol. So I don't know. I think it needs a lot more thought, but that's like what I was thinking. Like I'm just trying to figure out like, how does that graph relationship get defined in a way that's not like Google, where you can find backlinks, but you're traversing the whole internet to like find the backlinks. How do you make the backlinks more visible by default? And even be able to kind of have some level of identity behind them. Is if I only want to see like, like in a group sense, like on a web page, I want to see comments from Buzzard. It's like if we shared a link together and like we all have this, I don't want to see the whole internet's response to this necessarily.
No,
I want to see it constrained to this, or even friends of us, or like next level connections, and be able to kind of constrain that down, because that would be probably much more useful information to me. So I was thinking like, how does something like that even emerge, or what's the base level needed for that? And I think that's still like, I don't know how to reason about it entirely. But that's like, I think my thought process, what was going on there, and like why I was like trying to hijack the blockchain in that way.
Yeah, there's a few things. I've been poking around the philosophy around relationality, because that's
this is a good thing to bring up now, I think. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I've gotten is so there's a philosopher named Whitehead, and I haven't read any of his stuff, but he's popped up a bunch of times in my reading. And he has a bunch of concepts around relationality related to that Hegel like dialectic thing.
Yep.
And then somebody else, I forget his name already, but talked about. So there's a sort of theory that's being proposed by this guy named Layman Pascal around adjacency and like in relation to emergence and these kinds of things. And then this is related to grammar and like sort of boundaries and membranes and stuff. And prepositions are the grammar that handle all of that. So you can look at prepositional language as a potential for defining your relation. So there might be something in there to play off of. So like just, you know, and they have these
stuff then. Yep.
Yeah. So things like and there's a like spatial temporal thing with this, right? So like distance and nearness and stuff related along those things, and then you get all wild into quantum entanglement, and like you can have something that's, you know, a million light years away that is near, right? And so you get this hyper temporal thing, and then I can't keep up. But anyways, there's some stuff in there that I think languaging might like surface what these connections look like and how to sort of navigate them. But the interface that comes to mind in all of this is it is between. So like that's what I always go back to. It is all about betweening. So like there is a, you know, a context menu in my head, and it you right click or something like this and it says relate, and then there are prepositions or something to, you know, like actively relate the things or to move through the relations or whatever. And this comes back to the queries of like, you know, so binding in context to what you were relating to show those relationships. So like relationships as object, I don't know if that's the thing, or if there's a movement involved. I don't know. So this is where I'm probably overthinking it because I'm in the philosophy. So we need to just create like a small network of content, and then, you know, yeah, fiddle with that stuff, I think.
Yeah, I agree. We do need a small network of content. I think
Yeah.
like I'm starting to like be very intentional about, like I've been like writing notes and timestamping everything. I'm running a stopwatch and like timestamping everything because I'm just gonna write some giant file out at the end of it, or try to write a giant file out and be like, okay, well here are the things. There's relationships between things in time and like space and things we've previously talked about. Like how do we start building that like content network just within ourselves and the conversations that are being had. And it's going to be like painful manual work, but hopefully like that'll lead to like interesting tensions on like, okay, well, how do you build a thing that makes this way easier? So
no, I think that makes sense. We were just talking to a friend last night who is building a company, and he's like talking about, how do I spend my time? Like, should I be like zooming out and working on some of like the bigger picture stuff, or should I be building product features? And right now, they just got VC funding, so like they're going to be hiring people, but not exactly right now. And at one point it was like, well, the way I see things and the way that I've always worked is, if there isn't like a set process or protocol for how to do things, you should do the thing manually yourself, so you can figure out, because it has to be done anyway. So you're doing the task, but at the same time you're identifying what the protocol or process is, or like, you know, paying attention to that. And then, you know, that has to be nurtured and it will emerge more. But I've always worked this way. And I've always had people be like, why are you doing that work yourself? And I'm like, because I need to understand what's happening. Like, I can't hand it off to someone if I don't know like what's going on. So I'm all about painful manual labor, because then I understand it. And then from there, you can abstract it and turn it into something that can be passed along, so other people can do it for other tasks, not just that one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
So
think
if you need help, I'm game.
Okay, yeah, I will need help. I think it's like another one of those collaborative things too. It's like we all, at least to some degree, I think all of us have like some level of notes. Maybe Dave not. I think the rest of us are pretty like deep note takers.
Dave, no.
But I think, you know, it's like if we can go back through just the content we've created, and it takes time, especially since we probably weren't super intentional about it initially. It'll take time to go back and like even label things to any degree. But yeah, like I'm trying to figure out what some level of format for this looks like to make it a little bit more concrete. And I don't think I've spent enough time doing it yet to figure out really what that looks like either, because it's all interdependent, which I think is the whole theme. So
Yep.
Like you could define it for yourself, but it doesn't mean anybody else will actually understand like how you defined it. Like there needs to be some level of like synchronicity, but defining it top down initially doesn't work. So you have to like, it's like a dance, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a novel, obvious UI in here. And it's going to be annoying when it's just like, oh yeah, it just works like that.
Eventually it hits.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's probably a smaller scoped like content experiment that we can do, like so that we can collect clean data within like a tiny field of play.
Yeah, that would help so much.
You're going to get just so much work otherwise. And then like, so what are the media primitives? And then what are the kinds of things that we want to track? And then we can manually do all that, obviously. But then like within a set period, like capture 5 minutes or something, or whatever it is. Like, so designing that experiment so that we have like a workable amount of information that is representative of the type of like web that we're trying to bubble up. Yeah, even that will probably give us a decent view, and then you won't have to like spend 40 hours or two years copying a book like a monk.
Yes. I think that's a really good idea. Well, I don't know what that like small experiment looks like, or if it's already the spirit of meditation that we've done, or something new where we're like, because at least that already has like some level of timestamps we can export to CSV and like, okay, like it's not.
I was thinking about that. It's a little bit more organized.
Yeah. This also, your proposal kind of makes me think of like the Hadron Collider, like in terms of, okay, like there's too much noise out there. Let's like run an experiment and like capture a lot of data, but literally for like that very, very tiny, like, you know, like capture a very high resolution and then work with that as the field instead of the entire fucking universe.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is it? There's a concept called the holoverse, which is the interrelatedness of everything all at once, everywhere.
Yes. Holotropic, I think, right? That's
something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
So we don't need to start there. We can.
Yeah, that might be kind of a big task, huh?
A little bit.
I don't think we have enough gas.
No.
To do the compute.
Yeah.
Holoverse?
Something like that.
I think holotropic is the term I remember, but that's.
The Holoverse is an amusement attraction on the Gold Coast in Australia that opened in June 2016, which doesn't mean that it's not also something else.
That's where Pascal de Silva's from, so we'll go out there at some point to the Holoverse. The place.
Or is it holonic? Represents a way to overcome the dichotomy between parts and wholes. That's what I remember.
This is all
that's interesting
stuff, isn't it?
Too,
yeah.
But now there's some philosopher that had like some mind-blowing theory about, you know, time and space and everything that's going on all at once, and the relationality between all things, and I don't know. And then compress that into some argument, into some form, and when people read it, their brains like melt. So that'll be our first game. If you can make it through this whole thing and write a summary,
Yep.
You're in.
Yeah, if your brain doesn't melt.
Mm-hmm.
Holotropic
Carnage everywhere.
breathing is a thing. I don't know
Yeah.
what that is, but yeah.
That was the
Moving
term I was
toward
thinking, but that is the
wholeness.
wrong term. But it is interesting too. That's
Yep.
the topic of itself. I just don't want to try that at some point.
We want to get into anything else?
Well, I see Shahruz linked something, so I was just curious what that
Oh
was.
yeah. Also tangential, but as you guys were talking about distance and stuff like that, this is a very old Eno essay from like the early 90s, where he just talks about how so much can be lost in terms of language when you're trying to describe something. So he defines a system called axis thinking that lets you get more nuanced with what you're trying to say by defining things as two nodes that are on opposite sides and something in between, and where that stands. It's a really short essay. You probably get through it in 5 minutes. Might be relevant.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I picked up his journal or whatever it was
Nice.
that you mentioned. I gotta get through that.
This is in that too. It's in the pink section of the back.
Cool.
What was this guy's name? I didn't quite catch.
Brian Eno. He's the producer that worked with David Bowie. He invented ambient music, or coined the term at least.
Oh, okay.
What a weird thing.
Came up with
Brian.
Scenus,
Yeah.
which was great too.
Scenus?
Yeah, like the concept, basically of these movements that come out of scenes, and then he had some thinking about how they form and what they are, and as a little collective intelligence, this kind of thing. I'm probably not doing
counter to the concept of genius, that instead of there really being singular entities that are breakthrough kind of creators or philosophers or whatever, rather these things emerge from scenes where people are sharing amongst each other and protecting each other from the outside world and giving themselves space. And also in his book, I would recommend picking that up.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we are playing directly in that.
yeah, it sounds super relevant.
Yeah. Cool.
Nice.
This was very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is good.
Thanks for
agreed
hanging, Shahruz.
Yeah, anytime. Let me know if how else I can help and be involved.
I mean, if you want to keep doing these things, we're going to keep doing them.
Yeah, so I'll have a better Wi-Fi connection next time too.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if people have ideas for how to like sort of not focus us, but like if there's like certain, I don't know if it's games that we play or we just let it free form happen for a while, but I'm starting to think about that, like when we bring people together, because I don't think an agenda works for this kind of work, but like not something like an agenda, but yeah, there's different tools that we can use to make the best use of our time. I'm open.
Wonder if there's are you guys familiar with like Crazy Eights, the kind of product brainstorming technique?
Vaguely, never done it.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we do that, but the concept was basically that for any kind of product development stuff, if you're defining a feature or a whole product or something, take a one sheet of paper, fold it up into 8 kind of parts, and then you get 5 minutes to just draw as many concepts within those 8 rectangles as possible. Not suggesting we do homework, but I wonder if something along those lines of like bring a concept for an onboarding thing or something.
Yep.
Bit of a black box thing itself, but I don't know.
Yeah.
The nice thing about Crazy Eights is that it's so quick and you have such a small working area that you can, you don't get too caught up in the details of anything. It's very high level.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think we can. It's like a combination of those sync type things, when we're together, and then async ones that like we could black box somehow. If there's like a specific thing that we need like a multi perspective on without getting the group think, like I think doing one of those on a feature or a game type thing would be interesting. Yeah, I don't know what it is yet. I need to go watch more Taskmaster or any Taskmaster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Taskmaster sounds so interesting. I'm about to like sew and just watch an episode or two.
Hey.
Sweet.
Yeah, I've been suggesting it to everybody because I've watched the entire series twice during the pandemic.
You're
Very
like,
nice.
please,
Perfect
someone watch it
background
so we
viewing.
can talk about it. Yeah. Cool. Well, maybe a game before we meet up next. We can ponder that one.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Do you want to come into our Telegram too? I
Sure.
don't know
Yeah.
if that makes. Yeah. Cool. Well, then we can
Yeah.
coordinate there.
Perfect.
Sick.
Perfect.
All right.
Awesome.
Going list. Thanks everybody.
It was nice to meet you,
Thank
John
you.
and CJ.
Yeah,
Good
nice
to
to
see
meet you too,
everyone.
Shahruz.
See you
Bye.
around.
Right.
Alrighty.
See y'all soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Be in hell.
Oh.